Welcome to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast, where women are magical and empowered. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Monday, psychologist turned transformational feminine business coach. This podcast is for you if you want to prioritize your own pleasure, face your fears, and manifest your desires. This podcast is sponsored by the Fearless Feminine Academy, where I teach women how to turn their trauma into their superpowers. My goal is to show women that we can heal our world by creating time and financial freedom by doing whatever the fuck we want. Are you ready for the Divine Feminine Revolution? Let's get vulnerable and go deep. I'm so honored that you're here. Welcome everyone to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation with Nicola today, and I just want to introduce her as a transformational author and founder of the Unbound Press, a soul-led publishing imprint for magical women. That's all of you out there listening. To write world-changing books, which I gotta just start with an intro brag, even though I usually give it over to my guests. I am in the middle of writing my magical world-changing book, so I know we're gonna have an awesome combo today. So I'm gonna turn it over to you. Give us a brag intro, and I hope I said your name right. I forgot to check that in the green room.
You did. You did. Perfect.
I just had to rely on my spidey senses. What does that sound like in my mind?
No, you nailed it. So thank you.
And for all of you out there, I'm recording in my home today, right in front of my guinea pig cage. So if you hear some, interesting noises, it's just the guinea pig weighing in on what we're talking about today. And fun little fact for y'all, if you didn't know, guinea pigs actually are healers, and they work a lot with shamans in Peru. So we've got our little guinea pig shaman resident today. So Nicola, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go ahead and lay it on thick. Tell us all about your juicy work and how you've made it happen.
Well, I brag that I have transformed the path that I was on from working in corporate finance right up until my late 30s to becoming this transformational author and starting a publishing imprint. I brag that I've written 3 transformational books myself: Heal Your Inner Good Girl, Unbound, and Unbound Writing. And I'm in the process of writing my next book this year. I brag that I started the Unbound Press 3 years ago, almost by accident. The idea was suggested to me by somebody else, by my publisher at the time. And as soon as he said the words, the Unbound Press, I just knew in every single cell in my body that this was what I was meant to do. And I brag that I started a publishing company without knowing anything about publishing, apart from having been an author myself. And I brag that I've made it happen, and I've grown the most amazing team and the most amazing community of authors, literally world-changing women who are writing the most incredible books. And I brag that we are changing the world one book at a time, and I truly believe that that's what we get to do. I could carry on.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so with you on that. And I know for me, books were my first drug, total pure escapism. I love, 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 love to read. And I think it's such a powerful transformational tool. And it made me kind of think of Ani DeFranco, who's one of my favorite singer-songwriters, who started her own brand. So, I kind of want to just dive in with you. Give us a little bit of the before you manifested all of this, what was your journey leading up to?
Well, I spoke about it there, where I was working in corporate finance, 9 to 5 in the office every day. I did a degree in business, and very much followed what I would call now the good girl path, what was expected of me, good education, proper job. And I would go to the office every day, and I kind of enjoyed it in a way. I enjoyed the challenge of it, and there was this really clear career path to work my way up. But I got to a point and like I had my own apartment, I had a good job. On the outside, it probably looked like I was successful, but inside, yeah, I was just, my soul was shriveling up. I would go into the office every day and think, I literally can't be here anymore. But I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. So I felt really stuck at that phase. And that was kind of my mid to late 30s. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can really relate to that. You know, my previous life and kind of current life is as a psychologist. And I've definitely felt those moments where I felt very like bound up in my business and my career and in that good girl path. I've done a lot of healing work to, you know, integrate the good girl and the bad girl. So for those people who are listening, who are feeling like really stuck and just feeling like there's no way out, like, how did you kind of get the chutzpah to like go for it?
I know. I got to a point where I literally, like, I knew I couldn't carry on doing what I was doing. And I was really in this place of just asking the question, like, what do I need to do? I would go for my lunch in the park every day in my lunch hour and just sit in the park. And I didn't realize it actually at the time. I don't think I was doing this consciously, but now looking back, I can see I was in this place that was really receptive. I was really open to like to the answer of like what I needed to do or what the next step was for me. So, you know, I think that's a key piece for us to kind of ask the question and then be open to what comes. And actually for me, that was, I went like to a health spa for a weekend with my sister. When we were there was going to be a demonstration by this hypnotherapist, and I'd never had hypnotherapy before, didn't know anything about it, but something in me just said, oh, you need to go and watch that and be there for it. The hypnotherapist, like, she was an older woman, completely eccentric, like the way she was working. But it was so powerful, like what she was saying about the power of our subconscious minds. And it felt really creative and actually quite magical, like looking back. I just knew that that's what I was meant to do. That was kind of my gateway drug into this path that I'm on now. I thought, right, okay, I'm going to retrain as a hypnotherapist and a coach, and that's what I'm going to do. That was the first step. So I made this really intuitive decision to follow that. I thought that would be it. You know, I'd set up a hypnotherapy practice, but that was just the beginning of the journey.
So how do you always wanted to write? Like, is that something that you knew, or was that part of the unfolding?
I loved like writing and reading. When I was a little girl, like I was a total bookworm. I would always have my nose in a book. I wrote my first book when I was about 7 years old. It was a story called The Wise Owl, when I drew the pictures, and one of my teachers, Mrs. Baker, she typed it all up for me. And this was in the days before word process, you know, we didn't have laptops or anything. So I think she typed it up in a manual typewriter and made it into this gorgeous book for me, which I still have. I know, it's so, honestly, and it's a great story. When I read it back, I'm like, little Nicola, like she had some wisdom to share. So, but then I think I just shut that part of myself down, because I picked up all these messages that, you know, it's difficult to be a writer and it's difficult to make money being a writer, and only certain people can do that. And actually that I needed to focus on more like academic subjects or more sensible subjects. That's why I ended up going into business and going into a corporate environment. So I shut that creative part of me down, my writer self, for a huge part of my life. Like, I still loved reading books, but I didn't believe that I could be a writer. And it's only when I started my own business that, as soon as I started the hypnotherapy and coaching practice, I started blogging. But it was all very kind of professional, because I felt, okay, I have to do it in a certain way. I have to be very businesslike. So it took me a long time to actually allow my like real voice to come out.
I'm totally resonating with this. I feel like you're telling my life here as it's unfolding. And so I'm hoping that I'll become unbound.
Yay.
Like when you're
I'm sure you are already.
oh, thank you. And it's always a process, right? And I feel like
Completely.
a good girl can always like rear her
Totally.
great head for the
Yeah.
conditioning of the patriarchy. It's so deep sometimes that every time you release a layer, sometimes it feels like there's more. So I'm sure we have people out there like myself who are aspiring writers. And so do you have certain like writing tips? Do you have a regular kind of like a mindset practice, like where you just have a writing block, or what tips do you have for us as writers?
I mean, like you spoke about that kind of patriarchal conditioning there. And I think this really shows up when we think about writing, or certainly writing a book. Like I know when I wrote my first book or was thinking about it, all of the advice I could see, it felt really heavy to me. And like you have to have it all planned out, and you have to just show up and write for hours every day. And it just felt really rigid and not very pleasurable at all. So a key part of the way I approach writing personally, and I encourage others to do it, particularly women, because, you know, we're these magical cyclical beings, and we're not meant to be doing the same thing day in, day out. So it's to allow your writing to have that cyclical quality, like to realize that your energies will ebb and flow. So some days you might feel like you really want to be kind of pouring the words out onto the page. So brilliant, just go for that. But other days you'll feel maybe like there's nothing there, or you want to be in planning mode, or like your voice might change from day to day. So there's something here around acceptance, like accepting what wants to come through and trusting that as well. Like trust is such a key piece. And also allowing the writing process itself to be pleasurable, like to bring pleasure in whenever you can, because that makes such a difference. And it can be something like, well, I quite like to write in bed. That's my favorite place to write. So I don't want to be sitting at my desk. I'll go and get cozied up in bed, light a candle, maybe have some music playing, and just make it a really yummy experience. And that's totally against a lot of the kind of ideas that I had around writing when I first started.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really had to heal all that good girl conditioning to
So
just do it
much.
your own way and to dive into that pleasure. And I love that so much because I've really been researching. I always thought I would write self-help books given my background. But then I had this like really juicy novel idea that came to me. And I was getting like flashes of it and visions, and like little pieces were like downloading. And I was just like, wow, this is essentially like a self-help, but it's going to be told through like the characters, and so it's not, dry as some self-help novels can be. But I found so many amazing resources on YouTube, like Save the Cat, this 3-act story structure.
Yeah.
I mean, it really can be self-taught, especially, if you're going kind of for the more traditional novel piece. And I think for me, what brought pleasure, I actually just went away to a neighboring town by myself to get my outline down. And that felt like very naughty and kind of like secretive of like living this like writer's life. And I got it all down. And it was such a relief to me because I felt like, how sometimes they say the muse and the inspiration will kind of leave to the next person to draw a beautiful idea. And so I was like, I've got to get this down and kind of figure out what happens. But it was great to see once you have the main structure down, then you can kind of like jump around, do whichever pieces feel good to you. And for me personally, since I had so many years of academia indoctrination, my branding coaches and stuff would call me out and say, like, your stuff sounds like kind of corporate. It's like Dr. Megan comes on and starts writing. But when I talk, it's very like informal, and I'm a very informal, just like open book kind of person anyway. And so I feel like permission to do it differently. And so I actually just recorded myself and had it transcribed as well. And that was great. If you have a writing block, which I had for years, that's another great like workaround because I can always talk.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think we have this idea that you have to write a book in a certain way, like you have to do it properly, whatever that means. It's all of this good girl stuff.
Yeah.
But actually, like a book is just communicating an idea or a story, and we do that all the time, like all day, every day, like you say, particularly when we're speaking. So a lot of the writers that I work with, they prefer to speak their words rather than write them. And I quite often do that. Like if I'm out for a walk, that's when my words and the ideas can start to flow. So I'll just get my phone out and like make a voice note and get it transcribed. And that kind of really helps, I think, to bring through your true voice, because as soon as we start writing, sometimes we can start editing ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But the piece about the book, like the idea going off to work with somebody else, which I think I first read about that in Liz Gilbert's book, Big Magic, and it terrified me. It was when I was writing the first book. I was like, I have to write it before it goes off to somebody else. But what I recommend is to actually like connect with the soul of your book, the essence of your book. So like I have a meditation that guides people through that, but you can do it very simply. And I think when you have that relationship with your book, even if there are times when it feels a bit more distant, you can just be checking in with it. And it's like, I'm still here. I still want to hold space for you to come through. So it becomes like this collaborative process with your book rather than you having to figure it all out.
Yes, thank you for that mindset shift, because I love Liz Gilbert. She's definitely one of my heroes, and I'm hoping that my book will be like an eat, pray, love journey, because that was so inspiring to me when that came out. But yeah, I in some ways the idea of like a muse coming through kind of takes some of the ego pressure off. It's like, okay, I can channel, I can receive what wants to come through. But yeah, exactly. I gotta say I was a little maybe scarred by the muse hopping away, having been you know, I had a psychic session, one of my very first psychic sessions. They said like, you're going to have this like, you know, best-selling book, and it's going to bridge like with the world of energy work and traditional psychology. And that immediately like shut my good girl down, because it was like, how can I ever like make something that like powerful happen? I guess if I'm really real with myself. Yeah. It took years later, but now it's like coming through strong. And so I think it's just always like when we're ready, it flows through.
Completely. Yeah. I think sometimes we have to live our books before we write them. Yeah. So we're having these. It was lived. Yeah. Yeah. We have these experiences, and then that opens the way for the book to come through. And sometimes, or quite often actually, that happens as we're writing it as well. We're having these experiences which all kind of get to flow into the book. So it's just such a transformational experience, which I just love. It's so juicy. That's so good. I want to talk a little bit about good girl conditioning, because this is something I've worked on in my own personal therapy. I really just had like a shy little good girl who was very sensitive and never wanted to get in trouble. And then in high school years, I actually was more like the bad girl and did a lot of things, you know, that, you know, thankfully I got through and survived. But I remember working with an EMDR therapist, which is something I do in my therapy practice. And it's a trauma healing technique, which is really good. But we spend a lot of time going through like integrating the good girl and the bad girl versus having them on polar opposites and working against each other, you know, like getting them on the same team. And it was really interesting to see that for me, the good girl actually got me in trouble way more than the bad girl did. So I'm sure you have a lot to say on that. Like, what are your thoughts? Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of integration. That's why the first book was called Heal Your Inner Good Girl. When I was doing an interview once, somebody thought it was Kill Your Inner Good Girl. And I'm like, no, that's a bit extreme. So like in the book and in my experience, it's been a process of like introducing my inner good girl to what I call, like what you talk about as the bad girl is probably what I call like the unbound self, like our fullest, freest self. And for those two parts of us, those two aspects of us to have a relationship. So a lot of it's about acceptance and understanding. And I think you're right, because when we're like overly in that good girl place, we're so kind of focused and hyper alert on kind of getting it right and not upsetting anyone and not being criticized. That's when we get ourselves into trouble, because I think we're kind of hiding so much of ourselves and playing this role that it's just so easy to kind of slip up. And actually, kind of paradoxically, I think when we're in that like really rigid good girl place, that's when we can end up like really pissing other people off because they can feel it. Do you know what I mean? That's when we end up having more conflict, because people can feel that we're like hiding something or holding something back, and it can like be really triggering to other people. So I know that's been my experience, like trying to hide aspects of myself and play this role like in different ways with different people. Like I ended up backing myself into a corner in so many ways.
Yeah, I really relate to that because there is sort of like a fakeness. I mean, no one can be that nice or good
Yeah.
or happy all the time. And
Yeah.
so, and I think for me being in the service industry, I know a lot of coaches or therapists or, nurses or doctors, whoever, you have to you're in the service industry, it's a little bit of hospitality. And so I think like when you do that for decades, it can definitely take a toll.
Yeah.
And I found for me, I'm going to blame it on my 5 planets in Libra, but for me, it was always about like taking care of everybody else first. And then then maybe I'd be okay. Like once everybody's okay, then I can be okay. And it's just like ass backwards. Right. Yeah. So, it's such, really the revolutionary breakthrough for me, like joining the coaching community and realizing that like I can have it all by like prioritizing my own pleasure, and that actually like taking care of me first gives me so much more, and it's satisfying, and it's unbound, right? Like you feel fulfilled rather than resentful.
Exactly. And that benefits everybody. Like obviously it benefits us, but then the impact of that ripples out to everyone around us. And actually what I found when I was playing the good girl in my life, like I'd be able to do it for a period of time, and then something would blow up. Like I would blow up, like I had these really explosive like rages, which were like
really bad.
People would be like, what is going on? Because, normally I was so nice. And then all of a sudden, I've
been there. We all have.
Going off. Or I would get involved in like really destructive relationships. And I think that was a way for like my inner good girl to kind of play out in a way. And it was like really, really unhealthy, the ways that I used to find ways to express different parts of me that were just not helpful.
So tell us a little bit about the process of becoming unbound. And personally for you, the extension of the press. So how did that all come about? And what does that look like for you?
It's interesting because it's just been, it is an ongoing journey. And definitely my inner good girl is still there. And I've just learned to be in this place of acceptance with her and notice when she's kind of cropping up in unhelpful ways. But actually a lot of the time she's pretty helpful. So but becoming unbound, it's interesting because I first connected with that word, it was years ago now. I was doing Danielle Laporte's Core Desired Feelings, like reading the book and working through that process. And one of my core desired feelings was freedom. And, I was already on this path. I'd started my own business. Like I knew that freedom was important to me. But the word freedom, it didn't do it. Like, I don't know, it just didn't turn me on. It was like, it feels a bit like everyone wants freedom, but what does it mean? Like I couldn't feel it in my body. So I got out the dictionary and the thesaurus, and I was like, well, what word is really gonna kind of resonate with me? And one of the words was unbound. And as soon as I saw that, I could feel it in every single cell in my body. And for me, it was really important that it kind of described a feeling that something had been previously bound. And you mentioned that, Megan, like, about past experience, feeling bound. And I definitely experienced that. So I love that sense of, something literally kind of becoming unbound. It felt very dynamic to me. And as soon as I connected with that word, and this was before I started writing the books, actually. I think it was about a year or so before. Things started unfolding in my life. Like, it felt like another level of my work started to come through. I started to attract women who like really resonated with that word unbound. Then I started writing Heal Your Inner Good Girl and talking about the unbound self, which led to the second book, Unbound. I say the word unbound a lot. And it was through writing the second book that the publisher that I was working with, he read the manuscript, and it was him who suggested about starting the publishing imprint, because he was like, I can really imagine you doing this with other women and holding space for them to write their books, and you'd have a publishing imprint and it'd be called something like the Unbound Press. And again, as soon as he said those words, I knew that's what I was meant to do. And it's interesting because when I'd been writing Unbound the year before, I'd been working with this incredible mentor, very intuitive, and she kept saying to me, I keep getting this image of you like running writing workshops and helping women to write. And I was like, no, that's not me. I can't do that, because the whole writing process, particularly of Unbound, it felt quite disruptive. Like, I was experiencing a lot of upheaval and change in my life, which I think I needed to experience in order to write that book. But I couldn't imagine that I would be doing this work, like running a publishing company and mentoring other women to write their books. So it feels like connecting with that word and that energy, unbound, way, way back, and identifying that as one of my core desired feelings. It kind of set in play like this whole path that's unfolded since.
And I love that you even tied in like the business background by being able to kind of be the container, to help other women achieve that as well. I think is really beautiful and revolutionary.
Yeah. There's all the different layers to it. So it's interesting, isn't it? When we look back, we can see, like, we can connect the dots and see how we've got to where we are. And quite often when we're in it, it's like, it can feel like nothing's making sense. And I know that I felt like that for a lot of the time. I was like trying to find my way, and it's like, nothing was quite clicking. So, for a lot of the time when I left corporate and started my own business, I just had to carry on being in this place of trust and just taking those steps one at a time. And eventually it started to make sense.
Yeah, and I think that there's so much to kind of decondition about being a powerful woman. And I think Unbound really speaks to that, because I think the ties that bind us, a lot of times we don't even realize that it's the mass indoctrination and conditioning that's making us think that way. We just think that that's us because it's so ingrained, and so I love doing that kind of work with women. And I love the podcast as well, just because every person's story is so powerful, and it's so humanizing to hear that it's not just this like linear straight road to success, that like kind of success can kind of cost you whatever it takes to embody it, like, so for you, like, you had to live being unbound before you could actually like actualize it as, the business and the press and everything. And so
exactly,
I picked Fearless Feminine as my first sort of like signature program. And then I was like, it's just going to help with women with anxiety around visibility and stuff like that. And then I realized like, oh my God, like embodying Fearless, like that is,
I know.
It's a tough call,
Yeah, I know.
I think when you're in it, I'm kind of at one of those moments right now where I think I'm like right on the threshold of like the new chapter. And so a lot of the old chapter is like dying or, no longer serving or whatever. And it is quite emotional act of faith and trust to feel like it's going to be okay, even if it's like totally going into the unknown.
Yeah, completely. Which again, we're conditioned to have this expectation that like we should know what the next step is. We should know what's coming next. And it's the same with writing a book. I think, you know, we have that, we've like received these ideas that we should have it all mapped out and we know exactly what it's going to look like. And actually the creative process isn't like that, whether it's writing a book or living our own lives. So I think a lot of us actually are experiencing that kind of rebirth, reset at the moment. I'm hearing, like, I'm feeling like there's another layer or another level, something coming through, something shifting. And like so many of the women that I'm speaking to are experiencing that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly the past 2 years has been very dynamic.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a pause and a reset. And for me, I think you know, I've been interested in pleasure-based business and, you know, busy-based business. And I think for me, particularly with like COVID and just the old things not working as well as they used to, because the paradigm is shifting, which I really believe is happening in 2021 and continues, you know, it hasn't been intense. And I've just realized these things that I thought like I could just kind of like autopilot, like really were not sustainable. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be alive, but it certainly is, you know, new territory for everybody.
Completely. We're bringing through these new ways. And I completely resonate with what you said about like a lot of the old ways aren't working anymore. And what I'm finding personally is like my good girl, she loves kind of being in action and getting stuff done. And what I'm noticing more and more is it's not about that. Like action is important, but sometimes the less I do and the more I focus on my pleasure and my energy, like that is the thing that makes the difference. Yeah. So like it's just becoming clearer and clearer over the past kind of certainly 2 years. But yeah, my inner good girl kind of freaks out about that because she just loves being productive.
I know, I relate. And I think with the feminine, it really is about getting into the receptive and being like available for the great idea or business or whatever to drop in. And, you know, I resonate with my story. Like the good girl was like, okay, I'm going to be a psychologist. I'm going to help people. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a nice house and I'm going to have kids. And like, that'll be like, you know, me. Yeah. And those have been very like amazing experiences. But by the time I had like achieved all those things, I just felt really burnt out. Mm-hmm. And kind of exhausted from pulling off all of those things. For one, they bill it like, oh, and then you'll be complete and you'll live happily ever after, but they never really tell you what happens after happily ever after.
Exactly.
But yeah, so even for me, just going from psychology to coaching, it was such a wow, I can get paid that much. Like, wow, I can have that much fun. Like, wow, like I don't, you know, have to like have this like really painful aspect as an empath listening to people I care about tell me like their worst moments in life, you know? And so I'm still in it. Like, I think just really recognizing like it can be that easy and fun and pleasurable. And like, you really can get paid very well for doing what you love, you know? And I feel like that's a whole sort of mindset download that, you know, is not part of most of our programming. You really have to like seek it out and like find your own way.
Completely. And it's the same thing, I think, with our work, with our businesses. You know, it really can be really easeful and pleasurable. And actually, that's when we're at our most powerful. And it's the same. Like quite often I'll hear a woman saying when she's thinking about writing a book, it's like, oh, but who would want to read it? Because like everybody knows this, or like this comes really easily to me, so I don't think anyone's going to be interested. And it's like, no, that's where the gold is. You know, you want it to have that quality of ease and pleasure. You want it to be infused with that, because then your reader will feel it. So I think, you know, there's parts of us that always want to be like overthinking and overanalyzing and like trying to get it right. But actually, what's the most powerful thing is when we allow this quality of ease to come through.
That's such a good reminder. I know for me, I'm really into human design, and I'm a hermit role model. And so, which is a very like opposite vibe. And so the hermit is kind of the natural, and they just have some gifts that are like part of what you're here to come do. And so it can be a little bit of a mind trip to realize that like, you know, it can be easy and that we can just like follow our gifts, because that is, you know, where, like you said, the power and the gifts themselves reside. Now, I know when I first had that psychic reading, you know, 15 years ago about the best-selling book, like at that time you had to write like a query letter and get an agent. And I remember like getting those books and trying to write the letter. And I think I was so afraid of rejection, I never sent it off because I didn't want to get like lost in the slush pile. So I think it's such an exciting time. My numerology life number is, I'm a 2911. So the 11's like the creativity and confidence master number. And I know like my life is to be creative, and it's such an exciting time because we can all have our own platforms. We can have podcasts, we can go live, we can sell products, we could have YouTube, or, you know, there's so many different books, any kind of possibility there. And so I'm kind of wondering, you know, if someone has a manuscript or if they're interested in working with you, like tell us a little bit about how do you do your submission process?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because it's not the same as more traditional publishers at all. And sometimes we get people coming to us who have, like, they have a completed manuscript, which is amazing. And sometimes we just have people coming who are like, I'm feeling this call to write a book and I want to connect with you. And because part of the work we do at the Unbound Press is holding space for the writing journey as well. Awesome. And actually, what's most important to me, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, the books we work with, like, they're always transformational in nature. So they're going to be activating some kind of transformation. But also it's really important that the author is including at least an element of their story, because I really believe, like, every time a woman shares her story and is courageous enough to do that, like, that is world changing in itself. But it's that personal connection actually that makes the difference. So somebody can send a book proposal, like some people they will have prepared it amazing, but I always want to kind of connect with somebody and have a conversation, and just, it's an energetic thing more than anything. And what I find is usually if somebody is attracted to the Unbound Press and resonates with our vision and our message, then their book is going to be a good fit. So yeah, it is a very feminine way of operating. It's definitely not kind of a head based, like making decisions based on kind of what somebody's book proposal is like, or it's like, okay, you know, how is the energy working here?
And I love that because I can see, you know, you said a couple of times, like, I just felt it and I knew I had to go. And I love that intuition centered. And I think that that's one thing that I'm going to like really rail at the patriarchy this session, but
yeah, good.
You know, I gotta take it. An episode, you know, but I feel like that by devaluing of the feminine, you know, they've really cut us off from our intuition. And, you know, even for myself as someone who really identifies as intuitive and psychic, like, I can still go like, well, no, you know, like that logical mind and like that patriarchal masculine part of me sometimes does like pop in and go like, oh, well, that seems like nothing will come of that. Like, yeah, who wants to read your book or whatever, you know? And
yeah.
So I love that you have that like feminine leadership to hold authors through that. I think is really, really beautiful. And, you know, a book really can change the world. And I just love that so much. For me, I had another psychic reading actually, and she was saying, you're going to write kind of like this memoir, and the book, there may be an actual memoir coming, but this one is kind of like a fictional memoir. Like, I had to tell my husband, I was like, listen, so there's like, you know, basically like I'm a character in the book, but it's fiction, right? So inspired by, I'm leading people through the program. I had to tell my husband, I'm like, okay, you know, this is a book about crushing the patriarchy. So it is fiction, but the husband's not going to be good at it. I just got to let you know, like, she's going to have to like rebel from the patriarchy and like go on her own journey and like kind of.
Amazing.
I'm like, are you okay with that? And he was like, yes, I am. I'm like, okay, it is fiction. But it's kind of fun. It's been like playing with, you know, as a healer, a therapist, or a coach, like, you know, you get this view into people's psyches and the patterns. And when you've done that across, you know, decades, like, it's just, there's so many powerful stories you could tell just based on your own
Mhm.
experience. And so I'm threading a lot of those things through. And I'm kind of looking at my own life where I went this way, maybe a good girl turn,
Yeah.
when there was a clear, maybe bad girl turn, and then like inserting those themes in there as well. So almost like, I'm one of those metaphysical people who likes like the jumping timelines concept. And so
Yeah.
kind of jumping the timelines in the book. And so I gotta say, I have like a little bit of a fear of like having the eat, pray, love moment of just being like, I'm scared I'm going to walk away from my entire life I've created because it is so revolutionary. But I think really it's just more playing that out to see like, what did I miss? And like, I don't have to miss it because I can like write it.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I really believe that books are like these portals that we get to create, and definitely like it's a spell that we're casting as we're writing, and we never know what the impact, like where that portal is going to lead us to. Like it's a portal for our readers as well. Like each reader gets to experience the book as their own portal, but as the author, we get to create this kind of magical portal that we move through.
I think it's going to double as mindset work too, because it's
Yeah.
what I'm actually doing in my life. I was sort of told like, I'm just going to be, I keep pulling the card, like kind of like dreaming it into reality. And so,
Gorgeous.
it's going to be really fun. And I think I was talking to one of my Reiki mentors about it, and she was like, oh, when you talk about it, like you have the energy of like what you light up kind of like you were when you were pregnant. And I thought that was such a great like kind of empress analogy. Like when you follow your passion, whatever it is, it could be books or anything, you just know because you have boundless energy, you light up, and you just know that it's something that feels so good to do.
Yeah, it's what you're meant to be doing. And
Totally.
Again, it's about trusting that, because sometimes when something feels really good, it's like, oh, like the head gets in the way. It's like, oh, well, really, am I meant to be doing this?
It's so funny because we had to reschedule this interview a couple of times, and now I see why it was. I think I had to have my outline done because I'm totally taking this as a sign, just to like, continue onward. And it's so amazing to see what you've created with your press and the multiple books, and then coaching women. I mean, it's just very inspiring. I always like to kind of open it up to, we touched on it a bit, but like, what is happening in this, time of change for us all? And so just curious, like if you could make a wish for the world or, enhance the matriarchy in some way, like what would your wish be, or what would you want to see happen next?
We've spoken about this a few times, it's come up during this conversation, but for me, what would be the most powerful thing is if, like, certainly every woman, but imagine if every being on this planet just really trusted themselves and was able to be in that place of deep self-trust, and to act from that place, like to live from that place without questioning, without all of this conditioning that we carry. And I think, especially for women, because living in the patriarchy, we have picked up so much of this stuff, but for all genders, just to be able to trust ourselves, because we always know, like deep down. I just believe if we allowed ourselves to do that and lived and expressed from that place, like the world would change. The world could change like that. Talking about jumping timelines, like that would just enable us to shift to this new timeline.
And I feel like a lot of the younger kids coming in, I think sometimes, like the millennials and whatever will get judged for not wanting, just like not being able to function in a broken system. And so I have a lot of for the young people, and I see my daughter, like she is just built differently. Like, she has a little bit of good girl in her, but like she's just so powerful. And I feel like these kids really are coming in with superpowers because they remember like who they really are, deep down. And when the patriarchy tries to cover that up, they're not having it,
So. Exactly. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
so much hope there.
I know. I remember when, temporarily when the schools were shutting down because of COVID, I was like, wow, okay, so my daughter was on spring break and they just never went back. And I was like, wow, these little ones have already manifested like,
Yeah.
a whole other way. And she would be like hanging off her we have like a yoga trapeze. She'd be like hanging upside down every day on it. And every day she would be like, this is the best day ever, and I think for the adults in lockdown, maybe some people maybe were feeling that, but a lot of us were very anxious in the beginning and maybe people are, but I just think it's really cool. Yes, I think I often say in therapy, like, if you can't trust yourself, then you really don't have anything, because like we are the expert. Only we know what's really happening inside of us. And so I know it can be hard to trust, especially when it doesn't seem like it's working out on the outside. But yeah, I loved how I could like feel it when you said, just really like going into that deep place of trust is so transformational. So love that so much. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation and definitely felt like that was a sign that I needed to continue on and to trust. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. Tell us more about like how to work with you, where to find you, all the things.
Oh, well, the best place to head to find out more about the Unbound Press is our website, which is the unboundpress.com. So the Unbound Press, all one word.com. And in terms of connecting with me, my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. So I'm at Nicola Humber. So definitely come find me over there. DM me. I'm always open to hearing from people who are, especially magical women who are wanting to write books. Like, get in touch because I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know everybody go pick up a copy of The Good Girl, The Good Girl, because I'm sure we all could use a dose of that. And, bad girls have more fun, right? So I think that's part of the divine feminine revolution in my mind, is just, all these powerful women coming forward. And that's really been a theme that's been so beautiful throughout this podcast, is a lot of people were working in corporate, or they, picked a safe job, or, whatever. The before version wasn't totally working, and they went for it, and people thought they were crazy. Like, that's not going to work for you. Like, you've got a good job, you're making money, you're settled, like stay there, and it's been so powerful to see all these women say, like, I couldn't stay there, like I had to be unbound, it's so inspiring to me, and it really is possible, so if you're out there listening and wondering if it's available for you, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's about like claiming it and trusting and journeying onward, right?
Completely. And I think surrounding yourself, or allowing yourself to be surrounded by other women who are on the same or a similar path, that has like helped me so much. Like, we don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, and women lifting each other up, I think there's such, power when magical women come together, of course. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Nicola, for being on here. Thank you for being revolutionary and starting Unbound Press. And thanks, everybody, for listening. And so we will see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Megan. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Want to keep the conversation flowing? Find us on Facebook at the Divine Feminine Revolution Facebook group, where revolutionary women gather to listen to their hearts, monetize their gifts, and change the world.